What is the true price of a single act of kindness? For Ilara Vance, a 24-year-old waitress drowning in debt, the price was her job, her dignity, and nearly her hope. Every night she fought an unseen war against her manager's greed and her own exhaustion to give a plate of leftovers to a silent, homeless man. She thought she was just sharing food. She had no idea she was feeding a ghost from the world of billionaires, a man with a secret that would shatter her reality. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how a simple bowl of soup ignited a chain reaction that exposed a hidden tragedy and changed a city forever. The relentless Seattle rain hammered against the large plate glass windows of the corner spoon, the droplets tracing frantic, spidery paths down the pane. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of stale coffee, sizzling bacon grease, and the faint, sweet smell of damp wool coats. For Ilara Vance, this symphony of smells was the scent of survival. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the last of the dinner stragglers were finally paying their bills, their laughter grating on Ilara's frayed nerves. Her feet throbbed in her cheap, non-slip shoes, a dull ache that had become a permanent resident in the arches of her feet after 8-hour shifts that often stretched into 10. Every muscle in her back screamed in protest as she balanced a tray loaded with dirty plates, the clatter of familiar, jarring soundtrack to her life. Ilara's world had shrunk to the four walls of this diner and the 2 rooms of the cramped apartment she shared with her ailing mother. Her mother, Sarah Vance, was a woman whose vibrant spirit was being steadily eroded by congestive heart failure. The medical bills were a mountain, and Ilara's meager paycheck from the corner spoon, supplemented by tips that were as unpredictable as the Seattle weather, was a tiny shovel. Each day felt like digging, only to find the mountain had grown taller overnight. Her manager, Mr. Dennis Griggs, a man whose thinning hair was perpetually slicked back with too much gel, watched her from his perch by the cash register. His eyes, small and beady, missed nothing. He counted every sugar packet, monitored every splash of coffee, and weighed the trash bags at the end of the night to ensure no premium inventory was being discarded. To him, compassion was a liability, a rounding error in the profit margin. "Vance," he barked, his voice cutting through the diner's low hum. "Wipe down table 7 again. The Hendersons left syrup rings. I won't have this place looking like a pigsty." "Yes, Mr. Griggs," Ilara mumbled, her voice hoarse with fatigue. She grabbed a damp cloth, the coarse fabric chafing her raw dishpan hands. It was as she was meticulously scrubbing the sticky residue that she saw him for the first time. He was huddled in the recessed doorway of the closed bookstore across the street, a pathetic attempt to shelter from the downpour. He was just a silhouette at first, a lump of dark, sodden fabric against the brick. But as a passing car's headlights swept across him, she saw a face etched with a quiet, profound weariness that resonated with her own. He had a thick, unkempt beard, graying at the edges, and eyes that seemed to stare at something far beyond the rain-slicked street. He wasn't begging. He wasn't shouting or making a scene like some of the others who frequented the block. He was just there, a statue of forgotten hope. Later that night, as she was scraping the uneaten food into the waste bin under the watchful eye of Mr. Griggs, Ilara felt a sharp pang of something she couldn't afford. Guilt. The kitchen had made too much of the Tuesday special, a hearty beef and barley stew. A whole pot of it was left, destined for the dumpster behind the diner. "Just toss it all, Vance," Griggs ordered, locking the register. "I'll be in the back doing inventory. Make sure you lock the back door when you take out the trash." Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. It was a stupid idea, a reckless, fireable offense kind of idea, but the image of the man in the doorway, his stillness in the face of the storm, was burned into her mind. She looked at the rich, steaming stew. It was more than just food, it was warmth, a small defiance against the cold, cruel night. Her hands trembled as she ladled a generous portion of the stew into a large, empty takeout container she'd salvaged earlier. She tucked a plastic spoon and a handful of crackers into a paper bag. Her gaze darted towards the office. The light was on and she could hear Griggs humming tunelessly. Moving with a stealth she didn't know she possessed, she slipped the container into her oversized, worn-out tote bag, positioning her coat over it. She then hauled the heavy, foul-smelling trash bags out the back door into the alley. The cold rain hit her like a slap, instantly soaking her thin uniform. Instead of heading straight for the dumpster, she scurried around the corner to the front of the street. The man was still there, his head now bowed against his chest. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice nearly swallowed by the wind. He looked up slowly. His eyes, she saw now, were a startlingly clear blue, a stark contrast to his weathered face. They held no suspicion, only a deep, bottomless exhaustion. I, we had extra," she stammered, holding out the paper bag. "It's just stew. It's going to be thrown out otherwise. It's still warm." He looked from her face to the bag and back again. He didn't speak. For a long moment, he just stared at her, and Alara felt a flush of embarrassment. Maybe he didn't want her pity. Maybe this was a mistake. But then his chapped lips parted in a barely audible, "Thank you." His hand, calloused and grimy, reached out and took the bag. His fingers brushed hers for a fleeting second, and she was surprised by the faint, lingering strength in his grip. She gave a quick, awkward nod and fled back to the alley, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a strange, unfamiliar warmth that had nothing to do with the stew. She dumped the trash, locked the door, and clocked out, avoiding Mr. Griggs's gaze on her way out. As she waited for the late-night bus, huddled under the flimsy bus stop shelter, she glanced across the street. The man was gone. The doorway was empty. For a second, she wondered if she had imagined him. But then she saw it, sitting neatly by the bookstore's door, the empty takeout container. He hadn't just left it on the ground. He'd placed it tidily, as if it were a dish to be collected. And so it began. The single act of charity, born of a reckless impulse, soon solidified into a quiet routine. It became a silent covenant between the harried waitress and the homeless man. Alara learned his patterns. He would appear across the street most weeknights, usually after the main dinner rush, a silent sentinel in the urban landscape. She never knew his name, and he never offered it. To her, he was simply Arthur, a name she'd given him in her own mind, inspired by the old tattered copy of Le Mort d'Arthur she'd found on a bus seat once. It seemed to fit his quiet, almost regal stillness. Alara's life became a high-wire act of deception. She learned the rhythms of the kitchen, knowing which nights were likely to produce the most leftovers. She became an expert at distracting Mr. Griggs, asking him pointless questions about inventory sheets or upcoming specials, just as her coworker Maria was scraping the plates, allowing Alara to divert a perfectly good portion of pot roast or a thick slice of lasagna into a hidden container. Maria, a sharp-tongued but kind-hearted woman in her 40s, was her reluctant accomplice. "You're going to get yourself fired, kid," she'd whisper, her eyes darting nervously towards Griggs's office. "For what? A guy who doesn't even talk?" "He says thank you," Alara would defend, her voice low. "Every time. Thank you doesn't pay for your mom's prescriptions, Alara. That man's pride won't keep a roof over your head." Alara knew Maria was right. The fear of getting caught was a cold knot in her stomach. Every time she slipped out the back door, her pulse raced. But the alternative, throwing away good warm food while Arthur sat cold and hungry across the street, felt like a greater failure. It was a small rebellion against the world's casual cruelty, a statement that she, Alara Vance, would not let her own poverty extinguish her humanity. Over the weeks, small, fragile threads of connection began to weave between them. One evening, as she handed him a container of chicken and dumplings, a gust of wind whipped a page of sheet music from her tote bag. It was a piece she'd been trying to learn on the old, out-of-tune piano in her apartment complex community room, a rare indulgence. Before she could react, Arthur's foot shot out, pinning the paper to the wet pavement. He bent down, his movements stiff, and picked it up. He held it carefully, his brow furrowed as he looked at the notes. "Chopin," he murmured, his voice raspy from disuse. "Nocturne in E-flat major. A difficult piece. Your fingering in the 13th bar must be precise, or the arpeggio loses its fluidity." Alara was stunned into silence. It was the most he had ever said to her. His words weren't the ramblings of a confused mind. They were the precise, knowledgeable critique of a musician. He handed the sheet back to her, his blue eyes meeting hers for a moment, and in them she saw a flicker of a different man, a man from another life. Another time, as the first chill of autumn began to bite into the evening air, she brought him a thick leftover slice of meatloaf. He accepted it with his usual quiet gratitude. As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "The market is volatile," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Tell anyone you know to divest from aerospace futures. A storm is coming for companies like Omni Aeronautics." Alara just nodded, bewildered. She didn't know anyone with stocks, let alone aerospace futures. It was as if he were speaking a language from a distant planet. Yet the certainty in his tone was unnerving. She went home and, out of sheer curiosity, Googled Omni Aeronautics. It was a massive blue-chip defense contractor, its stock price seemingly invincible. The man had to be delusional. But their silent covenant wasn't just about food. One frigid night, Alara noticed he was shivering violently, his thin jacket no match for the biting wind. The next day, she spent her entire tip earnings, $47.32, a fortune to her, at a second-hand store. She bought the warmest coat she could find, a heavy, dark gray wool coat, slightly frayed at the cuffs but thick and clean. She also bought a pair of gloves and a beanie. That evening, she approached him not with a container of food, but with another bag. "I saw this and, well, it gets cold," she said, her cheeks flushing, feeling both proud and foolish. He looked inside the bag, his expression unreadable. He slowly pulled out the coat, his calloused fingers running over the wool. He didn't thank her this time. He just looked at her, his piercing blue eyes holding an intensity that made her feel transparent. It was a look of profound, aching gratitude that went deeper than words. He put the coat on. It fit him well, settling on his broad shoulders as if it were made for him. The coat, however, did not go unnoticed. The next day, Mr. Griggs called her into his cramped, cluttered office. The air smelled of souring milk and cheap air freshener. "Close the door, Vance," he said, not looking up from a pile of receipts he was stabbing with a pen. Alara's stomach plummeted. "I have a zero-tolerance policy for theft," he began, his voice dangerously calm. "Zero tolerance. That includes food, supplies, and company time." I don't understand, Mr. Griggs," she stammered, her hands growing clammy. He finally looked up, his beady eyes narrowing. "Don't play dumb with me. I see you. I see you scuttling out the back door. I see you talking to that vagrant." He said the word with palpable disgust. "And last night I saw him wearing a new coat. A nice coat. Where does a bum get a coat like that, I wonder? Maybe from a soft-hearted little waitress who's skimming from the register to fund her pet charity project?" "No!" Alara gasped, the accusation hitting her like a physical blow. "No, I would never. I bought that with my own money. My tips." "Your tips?" Griggs scoffed, leaning back in his squeaky chair. "Your declared tips barely cover your taxes. Don't lie to me. I run a business, not a homeless shelter. Whatever little game you're playing, it ends now. I catch you giving that man so much as a crust of bread, you're fired. I'll also make sure every diner in this city knows Alara Vance is a thief. Do you understand me?" The threat hung in the air, suffocating her. He was right. An accusation of theft, even without proof, would be a death sentence for her employment prospects. She thought of her mother, of the orange prescription bottles on the nightstand, of the looming rent payment. "Yes, Mr. Griggs," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "Good," he said, turning back to his receipts, dismissing her. "Now get back to work. Table 3 needs a coffee refill." Alara walked out of the office, her body trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. The diner, once a place of simple, honest work, now felt like a prison. And across the street, in the fading light, she could see Arthur taking his usual spot, a dark gray shape against the brick, unaware that the small kindness he had come to depend on was now a forbidden, dangerous act. The next few days were a special kind of hell for Alara. Mr. Griggs watched her like a hawk, his presence a constant, oppressive weight on her shoulders. He'd coincidentally appear in the kitchen whenever she was near the waste bins. He'd stand by the back door for his smoke breaks at the exact time she used to slip out. He was enjoying his power, tormenting her with his silent, smug surveillance. Alara's guilt was a physical ache. Every time she caught a glimpse of Arthur across the street, huddled in the gray wool coat she'd bought him, her stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot. He would look toward the diner, his expression patient, waiting, and every night she had nothing for him. She would leave through the front door, forcing herself not to look in his direction, feeling his unseen gaze on her back like a brand. It felt like a betrayal. She was starving a man who had come to trust her, all to save a job she was beginning to despise. Maria noticed her distress. "Just let it go, Alara," she advised gently one evening while they were refilling salt shakers. "You did more than anyone else would have. You can't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm." "It's not right, Maria," Alara whispered, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "There was so much food tonight. Chef Peterson made 3 pans of shepherd's pie. 1 whole pan went into the trash. It was still steaming." "It's Griggs' trash," Maria said grimly, "and he'd rather see it rot than feed a hungry person. That's the world we live in." But Alara couldn't accept that. A week after Griggs' warning, the pressure became unbearable. A fierce early winter storm was blowing in, and the radio was full of warnings about plunging temperatures and freezing rain. Her mother had had a bad day, her breathing shallow and labored, and the doctor had mentioned a new prohibitively expensive medication. The walls were closing in, and a reckless desperation began to take root in Alara's heart. She thought of Arthur, out in the storm. The gray coat was warm, but it wasn't enough. A hot meal on a night like this wasn't just a comfort, it could be a matter of survival. That Friday night, the diner was unusually slow. Mr. Griggs seemed to be in a strangely good mood, whistling a jaunty tune as he counted the day's earnings. He called out to Alara from his office around 10 p.m. "Vance, I need you to do me a favor," he said, a greasy smile on his face that immediately set her on edge. "My wife needs me to pick up her prescription before the pharmacy closes. I have to step out for about 30 minutes. Can you handle the last table and lock up the front if they leave?" "Of course, Mr. Griggs," she said, her heart starting to beat a little faster. "Excellent. Just hold down the fort. I'll be back to close out the register and lock the back." He grabbed his coat and bustled out the front door, the little bell chiming his departure. Alara stood frozen for a moment. This was it, a 30-minute window. It felt like a test, but also an opportunity she couldn't ignore. The last customers, a young couple, were paying at the counter with Maria. The kitchen was already clean, save for the leftovers. "Don't do it," Maria warned, her eyes wide as she saw the look on Alara's face. "It's too quiet. It feels wrong. It's a trap, I'm telling you." But Alara was already moving. "It's freezing rain out there, Maria. He could get sick. What if no one else helps him?" She hurried into the kitchen. Chef Peterson had left a container on the prep counter. It was a generous portion of roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and green beans, still warm from the heat lamps. It was too perfect. A small, rational part of her brain screamed Maria's warning. It's a trap. But the image of Arthur shivering in the cold drowned it out. She quickly packaged the food, her hands shaking so badly she could barely close the lid. "I'll be right back," she whispered to Maria, grabbing her tote bag. She slipped out the back door into the alley. The air was frigid, and tiny pellets of ice stung her face. The alley was dark and slick. She hurried around to the front, clutching the warm container to her chest. Arthur was there, a lone figure hunched against the punishing wind. Relief washed over her. "Arthur!" she called out, her voice thin against the storm. He looked up, his face grim. "You should not have come," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I brought you something," she said, pushing the bag into his hands. "It's chicken. Please eat it while it's warm." He took the bag, but his eyes weren't on the food. They were looking past her, over her shoulder, with an expression of cold dread. "Alara!" The voice was a whip crack in the night. Alara spun around. There, standing at the corner of the alley, was Mr. Griggs. He wasn't smiling anymore. His face was a mask of triumphant fury, and in his hand he held up his phone, its screen glowing. He had been recording her. "Well, well, well," he sneered, walking towards them, his shoes crunching on the icy pavement. "Caught red-handed, stealing company property, just like I knew you were." "Mr. Griggs, Alara began, her blood turning to ice water in her veins. "Save it," he spat. "I knew you didn't have the discipline to follow a simple rule. I knew your bleeding heart would get the better of you. I even left that perfectly packed dinner out for you. A little bait, and you swam right into the net." He turned his venomous gaze on Arthur, who stood silently, the bag of food clutched in his hand. "And you, leech, you think you can just take what's not yours? You're an accomplice to theft." Arthur didn't flinch. He simply met Griggs's gaze, his blue eyes as cold and hard as the winter storm. Griggs laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Don't bother showing up for work tomorrow, Vance. You're fired, and I'm calling the police right now to report the both of you. You for theft and him for being a public nuisance." He pulled his phone back up, his thumb hovering over the call button. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over Alara. It was over. Her job, her reputation, everything. She looked at the warm container in Arthur's hands, the cause of her ruin. She had gambled her entire life on a single act of kindness, and she had lost. The world seemed to slow down, the frantic energy of the confrontation draining away into a thick, suffocating dread. The icy rain felt like needles on Alara's skin. Mr. Griggs's triumphant, hate-filled face was illuminated by the sickly glow of his phone. The threat of police, of a criminal record, was a terrifying specter that would haunt her forever, making it impossible to find another job, to care for her mother. "Please, Mr. Griggs," Alara begged, the words tearing from her throat. "Please don't. It was just leftovers. It was going to be thrown away. I'll pay you for it, please." "Pay me?" he scoffed. "With what? Your stolen tips?" "No, this is about principle. It's about teaching a lesson." But as his thumb moved to dial, Arthur took a single step forward. He did something Alara had never seen him do before. He reached inside the inner pocket of the gray wool coat she had bought him. For a wild second, she feared he had a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a slim, worn leather wallet. His movements were deliberate as he opened it. With fingers that were surprisingly nimble, he extracted a single crisp business card and held it out to Griggs. "I suggest you reconsider," Arthur said. His voice was different. The raspy, hesitant tone was gone, replaced by a low, resonant baritone that commanded attention. It was the voice of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Griggs squinted at the card, a look of confusion on his face. "What is this garbage?" "Read it," Arthur commanded. Annoyed, Griggs snatched the card and held it up to the light of his phone. Alara watched as the color drained from his face. His sneer faltered, replaced by a slack-jawed disbelief. His eyes darted from the card to Arthur's face and back again, as if trying to reconcile two completely different realities. This is a joke," Griggs stammered, but the conviction in his voice was gone. "I assure you it is not," Arthur said calmly. He then turned his piercing blue eyes to Alara. "Go home, Alara. This is over." "But the police," she whispered, her mind reeling. "There will be no police," Arthur said, his gaze fixed on the now pale and sweating Mr. Griggs. "Go. I will handle Mr. Griggs." Confused, terrified, and utterly bewildered, Alara backed away. She gave one last look at the scene. The furious manager, now struck dumb, holding a small white card as if it were a venomous snake, and the homeless man, who now stood with the posture of a king. She turned and ran, not stopping until she was blocks away, her lungs burning in the frigid air. The bus ride home was a blur. Her mind was a chaotic storm of questions. What was on that card? Who was Arthur? She had been so sure she was ruined, and then, in a flash, the power dynamic had inverted in a way she couldn't comprehend. When she finally stumbled into her apartment, the false bravado evaporated, and the full weight of the night came crashing down. She was still fired. Griggs may not have called the police, but he would not let her set foot in that diner again. Her source of income was gone. She crept into her mother's room. Sarah was asleep, her breathing a soft, shallow whistle in the quiet room. The moonlight traced the deep lines of worry on her pale face. The sight of her mother, so fragile and dependent, shattered the last of Alara's composure. She retreated to the tiny living room, curled up on the threadbare sofa, and wept. She cried for her lost job, for her mother's health, for the crushing weight of a world that punished kindness, and she cried out of confusion for the enigma that was Arthur. Sleep did not come. The night stretched into an eternity, each tick of the clock on the wall amplifying her anxiety. She imagined the morning, having to tell her mother she was unemployed. She imagined the eviction notice, the pharmacy refusing to refill prescriptions. By the time the first gray, watery light of dawn filtered through the window, Ilara felt hollowed out, a brittle shell of despair. She must have drifted into a troubled, exhausted sleep because she was startled awake by a sharp, authoritative knock on the apartment door. Her heart leaped into her throat. It was Griggs, or the police. He'd changed his mind. She stumbled to the door, her hands trembling as she fumbled with the chain. Peeking through the peephole, she saw two figures. They were not police officers. They were two men in impeccably tailored black suits, standing with an unnerving stillness in the drab hallway of her apartment building. One was older, with silver hair and a sharp, intelligent face. The other was younger, built like a linebacker, his expression impassive. "Miss Ilara Vance?" the older man asked, his voice clear and professional, somehow carrying through the thick wood of the door. Fear warred with curiosity. She slowly unfastened the chain and opened the door a crack. Who are you?" The silver-haired man offered a small, polite smile. It did not reach his eyes. "My name is Julian Croft. I am the chief counsel for Pendleton Global Holdings. May we have a moment of your time? It is a matter of some urgency regarding Mr. Arthur Pendleton." Ilara stared at him, her mind failing to connect the dots. Pendleton Global Holdings? She'd heard of it, of course. It was a colossal, multinational conglomerate with interests in tech, finance, and real estate, owned by one of the wealthiest and most reclusive families in the country. It had nothing to do with her world of sticky tables and dwindling bank accounts. And then he said the name again. Arthur Pendleton. Arthur. Her Arthur. The world tilted on its axis. The hallway of her building, with its peeling paint and flickering fluorescent lights, seemed a surreal backdrop for the two men who stood before her. Julian Croft's suit probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. The sheer incongruity of it all left Ilara speechless. "Miss Vance?" Croft prompted gently, his voice patient but firm. "We mean you no harm. We are here on Mr. Pendleton's behalf. He is very keen to speak with you." "Mr. Pendleton," she echoed, the name feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. "You mean Arthur?" A flicker of something, perhaps surprise or admiration, crossed Croft's features. "Yes, Arthur. He is waiting for you downstairs." Her mind was a maelstrom. Arthur, the silent, homeless man she had been feeding, was somehow connected to one of the most powerful corporations on the planet. The business card, the sudden shift in his voice, it was all clicking into place. But the resulting picture was too fantastic to believe. I need to check on my mother," she stammered, buying time trying to get her bearings. "Of course," Croft replied with a nod. "We will wait." She closed the door, her back pressing against it as she tried to calm her frantic breathing. She peeked into her mother's room. Sarah was still sleeping peacefully. Ilara quickly ran a brush through her tangled hair and threw on a clean, if faded, cardigan over her t-shirt. Her reflection in the hallway mirror showed a pale, wide-eyed young woman who looked completely out of her depth. Because she was. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door and followed the two men down the stairs and out of the building. Parked at the curb, in stark contrast to the row of dented, decade-old cars, was a gleaming black Mercedes Maybach. Its presence on her rundown street was as jarring as a spaceship. The younger, silent man opened the rear door for her. The interior of the car was a world away from the city bus. The scent of rich leather filled her nostrils. The seats were plush, the cabin silent and insulated from the noise of the city. And sitting there, waiting for her, was Arthur. But it was not the Arthur she knew. The unkempt, gray-streaked beard was gone, revealing a strong jawline and a face that, while still etched with a deep sadness, was undeniably handsome and aristocratic. His tangled hair was now neatly trimmed and combed. He was wearing a simple but exquisitely tailored charcoal gray cashmere sweater and dark trousers. The only thing that remained the same were his eyes, those startlingly clear blue eyes, which were now fixed on her with an expression of profound sincerity and, she thought, a hint of shame. "Ilara," he said, and the voice was the one she had heard last night, the voice of command and authority. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." She slid into the seat opposite him, the door closing with a soft, expensive thud that sealed them inside the bubble of luxury. Julian Croft took the passenger seat, and the driver pulled smoothly away from the curb. "I imagine," Arthur began, his hands clasped loosely in his lap, "that you have a great many questions." I don't understand," she whispered, shaking her head. "Who are you?" He sighed, a long, weary sound. "My name is Arthur Pendleton, or more formally, Arthur Kensington Pendleton III. I am, or was, the CEO of Pendleton Global Holdings." Ilara stared at him, the name from the business card now attached to the man before her. The pieces were connecting, but the puzzle was still impossible. A CEO living on the streets? It made no sense. "But why?" she asked, the question encompassing everything. "Why were you living like that? Why didn't you say anything?" Arthur looked down at his hands, and for the first time, Ilara saw the immense sadness that seemed to be his constant companion. When he looked up again, his eyes were glistening. "Because for a very long time," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That is who I believed I was. A ghost. A man with nothing. It was not a test, Ilara. It was not some perverse game. It was my reality." Julian Croft cleared his throat softly from the front seat. "If I may, sir?" Arthur nodded. Croft turned slightly in his seat to face her. "Miss Vance, 2 years ago, Mr. Pendleton's wife, Eleanor, and his 15-year-old daughter, Lily, were killed in a plane crash. A private jet from his own company's aerospace division, a division he had personally championed." Ilara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She remembered Arthur's strange warning about Omni Aeronautics. It hadn't been a delusion. It had been a memory. "The grief was overwhelming," Croft continued, his professional tone softening with genuine sympathy. "Mr. Pendleton blamed himself, the company, the world. He liquidated his personal assets, established a trust for the company to be managed by the board, and one day he simply walked away from it all. He left his home in the Highlands with nothing but the clothes on his back. He wanted to disappear, to erase Arthur Pendleton III. For 2 years we have been searching for him," Croft explained. "We employed the best private investigators in the world, but he was remarkably adept at staying off the grid. We had all but given up hope." "What changed?" Ilara asked, her gaze shifting back to Arthur. "You changed it," Arthur said, his voice soft. "That first night you brought me the stew. I had reached the end. I was sitting in that doorway in the rain, not sheltering, but waiting for the end. I had given up completely. I believed the world was a cold, transactional place, and that my part in it had been a corrupting one. I felt I deserved the cold." He paused, collecting himself. "And then you appeared. You, a young woman who looked as tired and burdened as I felt, offered me warmth and food, with no expectation of anything in return. You risked your job, day after day. You showed me a kindness I had forgotten existed, a kindness I thought I had lost the right to receive." He reached over and gently touched the sleeve of her faded cardigan. "The coat you bought me, that was the turning point. Someone spent their own hard-earned money they clearly needed, not just to feed me, but to keep me warm. It was an act of such pure, selfless humanity that it broke through the fog. It made me want to be a man worthy of such a gift." He gestured to Julian. "The wallet was the only thing I kept from my old life. A reminder, perhaps. When that man, Griggs, threatened you, I knew I could not let your compassion be the cause of your ruin. It was time for Arthur the Ghost to die, and for Arthur Pendleton to come back." The car pulled up in front of the Corner Spoon. It was still early and the diner was closed, but parked out front was another car, a dark sedan. Mr. Griggs was standing on the sidewalk, talking to a man in a sharp suit who Ilara vaguely recognized as the owner of the building. Griggs looked agitated, his hands waving frantically. "What's happening?" she asked. "Justice," Arthur said, a hard edge to his voice. "Mr. Croft made a call last night to Mr. Henderson, the property owner. It turns out Mr. Griggs has been skimming profits for years. Your manager's being fired for cause. Furthermore, I instructed my legal team to make an offer. An offer? As of an hour ago, Julian Croft said with a thin smile, Pendleton Global Holdings is the new owner of this diner and the entire building it's attached to. The sight of Mr. Griggs, stripped of his petty tyranny and now pleading with the building owner's representative, should have felt like a victory. But Ilara just felt a profound sense of dislocation. Her world had been turned upside down so violently that she couldn't quite find her footing. She had gone from being fired and destitute to sitting in a billionaire's car, watching her former tormentor be dismantled by forces she couldn't even comprehend. "What are you going to do to him?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Nothing more," Arthur replied. "He is a small man who has lost his small kingdom. That is punishment enough. My focus is not on him." His gaze turned to her, intense and serious. "It's on you." The driver opened the door and Arthur stepped out, followed by Ilara. The morning air was crisp and clean after the storm. Mr. Griggs saw them. His face, already pale, turned a ghastly shade of white. He looked at Arthur, clean-shaven, impeccably dressed, and the recognition, the sheer mind-bending shock of it, rendered him speechless. He stumbled backward, bumping into a newspaper box, and then scurried away down the street like a frightened rat. Arthur ignored him completely. He turned to the diner, his expression unreadable as he looked at the place where he had been fed, where he had been shown the first glimmer of light in his long, dark night. "For 2 years, I saw the world through a different lens," he said, more to himself than to her. "I saw the casual cruelty, yes, but I also saw the cracks where the light gets in. The volunteers at the shelters, the quiet nods of solidarity between people with nothing, the small, unnoticed acts of grace, and you, Ilara. You weren't just a crack of light. You were the sun." He turned back to face her, his blue eyes searching hers. "I walked away from my life because I thought my wealth was a poison. I believed it had insulated me from humanity, that it had in some way contributed to the loss of my family. I saw what it did to people, the greed, the sycophants, the endless, hollow pursuit of more. I wanted no part of it. But you showed me something crucial," he continued, his voice resonating with a newfound purpose. "Wealth isn't inherently good or evil. It is a tool. It can be a weapon that isolates, or it can be a lever that uplifts. For 2 years I had nothing, and I could do nothing but receive. Now I want to do something." Julian Croft approached them, holding a set of keys. "Sir, the preliminary transfer is complete. The property is yours." Arthur took the keys and walked to the front door of the Corner Spoon. He unlocked it and pushed it open, the little bell chiming softly, mockingly in the empty diner. He held the door for Ilara. She stepped inside. The diner looked strange in the morning light, stripped of its evening rush and moody glow. It just looked tired and worn. She could see the syrup rings on table 7 that she had been forced to scrub. She could smell the faint scent of old grease that clung to everything. This place had been her prison, and now the man she had saved owned it. "I am not going back to my old life," Arthur stated, walking behind the counter, his expensive shoes silent on the worn linoleum. "I cannot be the CEO who obsesses over quarterly earnings and shareholder value. That man died with my wife and daughter, but I can't be the ghost in the doorway either. That man was saved by you." He leaned against the counter, right where Mr. Griggs used to stand and watch her. "So I am going to build something new, a new kind of foundation under the Pendleton name, one that doesn't just write checks to establish charities, but one that operates on the ground level. A foundation that creates and runs high-quality shelters, food centers, and job training programs. Places that aren't just about survival, but about dignity. Places that offer a hand up, not a handout." He looked directly at Ilara, and his next words sent a shockwave through her. "And I want you to run it." Ilara's jaw dropped. "Me? I'm a waitress. I don't know anything about running a foundation." "You know everything that matters," he countered, his voice firm. "You know empathy. You know integrity. You know what it's like to struggle, and you know the profound impact of a single, dignified kindness. You have a master's degree in humanity, Ilara, earned in the hardest of classrooms. That is a qualification no university can offer, and no amount of money can buy." He pushed off the counter and walked towards her. I don't want a bureaucrat. I don't want a corporate suit. I want a partner, someone with a true heart to be the moral compass of this entire endeavor. I can provide the resources, the infrastructure, the financial backing. Julian and his team can handle the legal and logistical complexities. But I need you to provide the vision, the soul. He stopped in front of her. I am offering you a job, yes, a position as the executive director of the new Pendleton Benevolence Foundation, with a salary that will ensure you and your mother will never have to worry about a medical bill or a rent payment again. But it's more than a job. It's a chance to take the compassion you showed to one man in a doorway and multiply it by 1,000, by 10,000. Tears streamed down Alara's face, but for the first time in years, they were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of overwhelming, unbelievable hope. Everything she had ever been, kind, resilient, empathetic, despite her circumstances, was not a weakness to be exploited by men like Griggs, but a strength to be valued by a man like Arthur. This diner, Arthur said, gesturing to the room around them, will be our first project. We will gut it. We will build a state-of-the-art kitchen. And from here, we will launch a program that provides gourmet, nutritious meals to every shelter in this city. No more day-old bread and thin soup. We will serve with dignity. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that transformed his face, erasing years of grief. We can call it the Corner Spoon Project. Alara looked around the shabby diner, but she no longer saw a prison. She saw a beginning. She saw a future she could never have dared to dream of. A future where her kindness was not a liability, but her greatest asset, her currency. Yes, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, I'll do it. 6 months later, the transformation was staggering. The old greasy sign for the Corner Spoon was gone. In its place was a simple, elegant sign that read, The Sarah Vance Kitchen. Alara had insisted on the name, a tribute to the woman whose quiet strength and unwavering love had been her anchor through the darkest storms. Arthur had agreed without a moment's hesitation. The inside bore no resemblance to the tired diner it once was. It had been completely renovated, turned into a gleaming industrial-grade kitchen and community space. Where the sticky booths once stood, there were now classrooms for literacy programs and job counseling sessions. The air no longer smelled of stale coffee, but of fresh bread baking, of savory herbs and simmering stocks. Alara was no longer in a faded uniform, her pockets stuffed with order pads. Today she wore a simple but professional navy blue dress, her hair tied back, a confident light in her eyes that had long been extinguished by exhaustion. She moved through the space not as a harried waitress, but as a leader. She conferred with the head chef, a celebrated local restaurateur Arthur had hired away, about the week's menu for the city's shelters. They were planning a braised beef with root vegetables, a far cry from the watery stew she had once smuggled out the back door. Her mother, Sarah, sat at a small table in the corner, looking healthier and more vibrant than she had in years. The best doctors in the state, paid for by the Foundation's comprehensive health plan, had managed her condition beautifully. The perpetual worry had vanished from her eyes, replaced by an immense pride as she watched her daughter command the room with grace and purpose. Maria was there too. After Griggs's downfall, Alara had immediately offered her a job. She was now the floor manager for the Foundation's volunteer program, her sharp tongue and kind heart perfectly suited to organizing the dozens of community members who now came to help. Arthur Pendleton was a frequent visitor, though he never took a formal title. He had found his purpose not in a boardroom, but in the quiet, meaningful work of the Foundation. He often put on an apron and worked on the food prep line, chopping vegetables alongside volunteers, his movements calm and focused. He was quieter now, the profound sadness in his eyes replaced by a gentle, peaceful contentment. He and Alara had a partnership built on mutual respect and a shared vision. He was the anchor, and she was the sails. One afternoon, as Alara was finalizing a proposal for their second project, a shelter for homeless youth with an integrated arts and music program, Arthur approached her. "I saw the news this morning," he said quietly. "Omni Aeronautics. Their stock plummeted 20%, An internal whistleblower exposed a massive cover-up regarding faulty engine components, the very same ones used on... His voice trailed off. Ilara placed a comforting hand on his arm. "I'm so sorry, Arthur." He nodded, looking out the window at the city. "For a long time, I thought my legacy would be that company, that failure, a monument to my own hubris. But now..." He turned his gaze back to the bustling kitchen, to the volunteers laughing as they packed meals, to Sarah smiling as she talked with Maria. "Now I think this will be my legacy, our legacy." Later that evening, as the last of the delivery vans departed, filled with hundreds of hot, dignified meals destined for the city's most vulnerable, Ilara stood on the sidewalk where she had once so timidly offered a container of leftovers. The streetlights cast a warm glow, and the city felt different. It was still a place of struggle and hardship, but it was also a place of hope, a place where a single act of kindness, a simple bowl of soup, had refused to be a dead end. It had become a doorway, opening up a future she had built, a future where no one had to feel invisible in the rain. She took a deep breath of the cool night air and smiled. The work was just beginning. Ilara's story teaches us a powerful lesson. You never know the true impact of your actions. What she saw as a simple bowl of soup was, for Arthur, a lifeline. It wasn't about the food, it was about the dignity, the recognition that he was still a human being worthy of care. Her kindness wasn't a transaction expecting a reward. It was a reflection of her character. And in the end, her character became her destiny. This story is a testament to the fact that compassion is the most valuable currency we possess. It reminds us that in a world that often feels cold and transactional, a single selfless act can still create a ripple that changes everything. If this story moved you and you believe in the power of kindness, please take a moment to hit that like button to help us share it with more people. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that their small actions can have a big impact. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more true life stories that prove the human spirit is the most powerful force for change in the world.